welcome back. Coming up on this week's show, the wacky world of the English Championship, what MLS TV ratings tell us about soccer in the US of A, news about the future of the Scottish Premiership on US TV, Liga MX makes its return this weekend, plus we have letters from you, the listeners, in our mailbag section. I'm Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, joined alongside my co-host, Kartik Krishnaiyer. Now, Kartik, this past couple of weeks has been, for me at least, amazing. Seeing Real Madrid lifting the trophy on the final day of the season. Of course, Leeds United winning the championship. On Wednesday, seeing Liverpool on the celebration on the Cup, which was live on NBCSN. And I think pretty much all around the globe, it's been a good time of the year if you're a soccer fan. Of course, it looks like Juventus in Serie A will probably win the title. As we're recording this on Thursday, probably later today. And then you had the Bundesliga, what seems to be like a few weeks ago now. And yes, Bayern Munich ran away with it. But it was good to see a trophy being lifted there, but also a season ending. Anything else I'm forgetting, Kartik? What has been great about these last couple of weeks?
I've loved the MLS is Back tournament and the NWSL Challenge Cup. I'll admit, every single one of those trophy ceremonies, I did not see that you've listed. The only one I did see, or only celebration I saw, was West Brom for promotion, finishing second, and that was less subdued than I thought it would be in this era of COVID, and also less subdued given that West Brom limped over the line. But they're back in the Premier League, and great for that club. I think it's great for the West Midlands, especially if Villa can stay up on Sunday, because Wolves are as good as they've been in a couple decades. West Brom, quick return, 2 seasons down, back into the Premier League, and Villa might be in the middle of orchestrating a great escape. We'll know for sure on Sunday.
So let's start off with the Championship. And Kartik, for the last 3 seasons, I've been watching the Championship pretty religiously throughout the entire season. I of course, before that too, but religiously in the last 3 years. I know you're a avid watcher too. And this is no disrespect to anyone, but for me, Kartik, not only is the Championship one of the most competitive leagues, but the quality is fantastic. The quality from top to bottom is really high. And when I watch these games, honestly, Kartik, and I've watched a lot of MLS's Back, but the quality of the Championship from top to bottom, to me, is better than Major League Soccer.
It probably is, and I'll say this also, and I'm not trying to bash the Premier League, but what happens in the Premier League is a lot of the teams, particularly the teams that seem to be hanging on every season and staying in the league, play very defensively. There's a bigger gap now. We're seeing this. Liverpool's going to finish on 99 points. Manchester City were on 100 2 years ago. They were on 98 last year. Liverpool was on 97. Prior to the last 3 seasons, no team in Premier League history had ever had more than 96 points. Now in the last 3 years, we're going to have 4 teams over that mark. And the Championship and why Norwich continued to play the way they did this year in the Premier League, and they struggled, obviously, and they're getting relegated again, is because that's Championship football now. More often than not, you see teams in the Championship go for it. There are teams, Fulham fans, Fulham is the great example this season for me, under Scotty Parker, that do play that very negative brand of football that we see mid-table in the Premier League. But for the most part, Championship teams go for it. And that's what makes this, and Leeds, of course, is better to watch, in my opinion, than any Premier League club. And that's not a shot at the Premier League, because they're better to watch than any Bundesliga club or La Liga club also right now. The only team I would pick over them randomly to watch a match is Atalanta. But there is this go for it mentality in the Championship, Chris. And the other thing is the gap between the teams just doesn't exist.
Right.
And we saw in the last week or 2 weeks, or actually I should say since the restart, Nathan Jones go back to Luton Town and offer a great escape. Luton Town looked like, compared to the rest of the league, they were completely undermanned. Charlton was the other team that was undermanned, and they got very negative toward the end. But Nathan Jones, who you of course know as Welsh, did a great job at Luton in his first stint. Didn't go so well at Stoke for him. He decided to play football. And they got out of their trouble by playing football, including a high-scoring match yesterday. We see the same thing all over the division, and obviously we're going to talk about your team in a minute, Chris, I'm sure. But they played their way out of trouble this year, and they played their way into potentially promotion, and that's why I love the championship. It's not just that it's so competitive in terms of scores and teams coming up and going down, with the exception of West Brom seems to always, whenever they're in the division, they're at the top of the table. They're the team that is money in the league when they're down in that league. But it's the style of football, and Premier League football was like that, Chris. For people who are newer Premier League fans, Premier League football was like that for about 20 years, and then at some point the financial stakes became so great, and it became so cost prohibitive to potentially be relegated that teams stopped playing football. And they saw Ian Holloway bring Blackpool up. I think maybe that was a decisive moment, and continue to play open, entertaining football. And they got relegated. And since then, a lot of teams that stay up don't like to play. This season has been very different, though, because Aston Villa, Dean Smith has not compromised his principles. Daniel Farke did not compromise his principles. They, of course, go right back down, but they kept playing the way that they played in the championship. And then Chris Wilder, same thing. So maybe the Premier League is turning a page now. Let's see if Slaven Bilic and if Bielsa is still at Leeds, if they continue to play the beautiful football those two teams have played this season once they get up. With Bilic, maybe he's gun shy because at West Ham, being open and entertaining ended up getting him the sack. So maybe he's going to pare it back once they go up. But that's why you should watch the championship. It's fun.
The best example, Kartik, to me is yesterday was Brentford against Barnsley. Here's Brentford, a club that's probably the most informed club in the league, winning games after games after games, basically one game away from getting promoted to the Premier League. Barnsley looking dead and buried, looking like they had no chance. A team of youngsters, a team that was down on their luck, got a couple of good victories in the last few weeks. And they go into this game and Barnsley pull off a shocker. I mean, Barnsley defeating Brentford in the last minute.
And Chris, you know what the most shocking thing was? Okay, so Brentford is pushing promotion. Barnsley get the goal almost at halftime. And this, I guess I should register an ESPN Plus complaint here, is that with ESPN Plus, they don't have the window that you used to have in on ESPN3. So I'm trying to flip on my Apple TV back and forth between West Brom and QPR, an equally epic game with the same. West Brom and Brentford are competing for that last promotion spot, and Barnsley is trying to survive in the Premier League, and then I'm trying to keep an eye on what's going on with Luton. That match is not being televised, etc. So I ended up relying on the score bug while I had these two matches flipping back and forth. Barnsley at 1-1, a belter of a goal from De Silva to give Brentford some life and give Brentford some hope of promotion. At that point, from minute 68, whatever it was, onward, 64 onward, Barnsley were on the front foot. They had most of the ball. They were going forward. They were trying to get goals. And it was an incredible escape. It was a terrible way for Barnsley to say goodbye to Griffin. Oh, well, I guess they're not saying goodbye to Griffin Park now, right? Because they've got the Swansea.
One more match.
They'll have to play Swansea in the playoffs. But that's what the championship is about. And so again, I mean, I'm happy NBC's got a couple of matches and has a relegation fight coming into the last day this year on Championship Sunday. But the final day in the Premier League, the final day in La Liga, the final day in Serie A, all these top leagues in Europe, none of them ever delivered the drama of the championship. And we're talking about this right now, Chris. We could have had the same conversation last season, the season before. Every year, this is if there's one set of football matches I watch and keep a close eye on, it's the last day in the championship. And my final takeaway for the listeners would be the final five, the bottom five in the championship table, when we turned the calendar to July 1st, just 3 weeks ago, they all survived. The three that go down were not in the bottom five.
Wow. And that's the thing.
That's how competitive the league is.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there was a points deduction for a team that was Wigan that was playing really well. So they won't go down because of that. But still, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and that's the thing going into that final day of the season yesterday. And I realize too, listeners, most of you probably didn't watch these matches. Maybe you kept abreast of what was going on. I mean, it was at the same time as a fantastic Liverpool against Chelsea game with Pulisic just playing amazingly. So I realized that probably a lot of listeners weren't actually following these matches. But out of the final day of the championship, the regular season on Wednesday, out of the 12 matches, 10 of them had implications on either promotion, trying to make the playoffs, or trying to escape relegation. So there were only 2 dead rubber matches. And now we know the teams that are going up, and we know the teams that are going into the playoffs. We believe we know which of the teams are going to get relegated because Wigan Athletic got a 12-point deduction for going into administration, but there is an appeal. So,
and we also don't know about Sheffield Wednesday yet. They could. I
think they'll be okay though. I don't know. That's the indications I'm getting. Is Wednesday's going to be okay, but it'll be Wigan that probably. With the appeal, we don't know. You mean,
and it's a shame for Wigan because once they knew that this was possible, they went on a big run to try and inoculate themselves. They're actually one of the few teams in the division that ended up with a positive goal difference because they started just ripping teams, but it was too little, too late, and so you have to feel for Paul Cook and that team and the players.
Yeah, and one more thing before we move on. Actually, 2 more things. First is, and then, as Kartik mentioned a few minutes ago, Swansea, who before the game on Wednesday had the opportunity to try to make the playoffs, but it was their fate was not in their own hands. They would have to hope that Cardiff would lose or Nottingham Forest would lose. But if Nottingham Forest lost their game, and Swansea won their game in the final day of the season, there was a 5-goal goal difference, so that they would have to make up. Swansea won their game 4-1, so that's a +3 goal difference. And Nottingham Forest on the final day of the season lost to Stoke City by 4-1, which was again a 3-goal difference there. So 3 + 3 is 6, and Swansea go into the playoffs a +1 goal difference over at Nottingham Forest, same number of points total. But I was in tears. It was tears of joy, going absolutely crazy, just watching this unfold. And I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, the impossible is possible. I mean, the way that they were playing, Wayne Routledge, a veteran, even scoring 2 goals. I mean, the first goal was absolutely amazing. Rhian Brewster, who's on loan from Liverpool, scoring a wonder goal. Liam Cullen, who's first goal for Swansea, comes off the bench and scores within 30 seconds. Just an incredible day for me personally. But again, it shows the championship, just the excitement levels. And Kartik, let me just chime in here too with a comment from one of the listeners. And this is from Alan. He says, do you think that ESPN missed a trick on the last day of the championship by not giving the games a higher profile across their channels? I know that they would have been going up against the NBC SN Love Fest at Anfield, but the drama in the championship deserved to be witnessed by more football fans. What a day of drama. I watched the Brentford against Barnsley game, and the commentator did a good job of keeping viewers up to date on what was going on around the grounds. Do you agree on that one, Kartik?
Yeah, I think the commentators, and same thing with the West Brom QPR match, did a fantastic job. And I was also struck by the irony, by the way, of QPR playing with it was a dead rubber for them, playing so hard at the Hawthorns that they almost sent one of their rivals, local rivals, Brentford or Fulham. And if you know West London, you know how close all those grounds are, and Stamford Bridge would be the other. There are 4 teams on that side of London that are close to one another through. The commentators were great in keeping people abreast, but ESPN did miss a trick, and I am really surprised that they haven't either done something to showcase these matches, the final match day in the championship, now in the third season that the second season that they've had the rights, or the It's the third season they've had the EFL rights.
Yep.
Second season of the FA Cup and Serie A, or the playoff final. I mean, so it became a difficult thing to accept that the playoff final, which to Fox's credit, they had always shown going back. You had the stat, Chris. You wrote an article about it when ESPN moved it behind the ESPN Plus paywall. It had been on U.S. television over the air, or linear television, not over the air, but linear television for 20 some odd years, and suddenly was behind a paywall on streaming. And this, where we really missed a trick yesterday was, again, I said, because of the clunkiness of ESPN Plus, and no picture-in-picture, you can't have the four frames like you used to with ESPN3 back in the day.
The mosaic.
It was very difficult to keep track of all the matches except on your app, on whatever score app you use. So I decided, okay, I'd love to watch Leeds, but that game is not meaningful in terms of Leeds' own fate. So let's not watch that, and let's try and focus on the other two matches. But even switching back and forth between the other two matches meant leaving the game and then firing up another game, letting it load again, and then losing inevitably about 30 seconds of action each time.
Yeah.
If there is a better way, listeners out there, let me know, or let us know. Soccer Talk, but it's difficult.
Yeah, I think the only way would be that you'd have to have a bunch of different monitors or a bunch of different iPads all set up, and not all of us are wealthy enough to have like 3 or 4 iPads to set up to be side by side, or 3 or 4 monitors side by side. They missed a trick, but I think for ESPN Plus subscribers, I think the championship will always be on ESPN Plus. And I don't see even a final, even if it was a Welsh derby final between Swansea and Cardiff, or a London derby between Brentford and Fulham in the final, or a variation of those two. I don't see them moving it to television. I think this is an ESPN Plus product. There's nothing wrong with that. But for the viewership for the United States, they're missing out for sure. But I think at the end of the day, Kartik, I think it's one of those things that I know you watch Championship regularly, and I do too, kind of almost being forced to, in a way, with my club getting relegated from the Premier League and going to the Championship. But I've just been blown away by just the, not even on the last day of the season, but the quality of this league throughout and how competitive it is. It is a really fun league to watch. Now, Kartik, let's move on.
One last thing I want to say about Barnsley is they were on ESPN Plus the other day against Leeds.
Yep.
And I had a feeling they might do this to Brentford, because that's the toughest match Leeds has faced in a long time. And again, team that was fighting for their lives came out and attacked against Bielsa's Leeds team. And they had enough of the ball that they limited Leeds scoring only once, which is remarkable. So anyway, fans, you might want to check out the playoffs. And Chris is obviously a partisan in the playoffs, but ESPN Plus will have all the games on ESPN Plus. So there were people asking me yesterday, based on the fact that there were only 3 games on, this doesn't mean they're not going to show us all the playoffs. They are going to show all 5 matches, it would be, of the playoffs and the final.
Yeah, and the whole schedule is at worldsoccertalk.com. Kartik, as far as MLS is back, what's been the standout match or kind of the positives that you've seen from this one so far?
Well, I guess the negatives are that the New York teams have been eliminated, and the and Atlanta, and fortunately or unfortunately, Atlanta seems to be consuming a lot of the broadcasts even when they're not playing, right? Mm-hmm. For me, the positives have been how good Columbus has played, how Jaap Stam has gotten Cincinnati to buy into kind of building from the back and developing that way. And then, of course, the host team, Orlando, how well they played. Philly Union, I expected to have a good season this year, and they've looked very good in the tournament as well. So those would be my standouts. I guess Colorado not playing so well, but they had really some bad breaks. See, this is the thing that's happened in this tournament. Like a major international tournament, if you get guys sent off in the group stage, you're basically done, right? And we saw the Kansas City Minnesota game turn on a red card. We saw Colorado fight valiantly against Kansas City, even 2 men down. We saw Atlanta essentially just ship it once they got 2 men sent off against Cincinnati and quit on the tournament. So, Yeah, I think bookings, and you've talked about the excessively physical nature of MLS, Chris. I think bookings have been the key, and the fact that if a team can keep 11 men on the pitch, they stand a pretty good chance. This is, I think, a good segue to talk a little bit about ESPN's commentary, if you don't mind, because sure. I think one of the things that has been overriding in the discussions between John Champion and Taylor Twellman have been kind of these player discipline issues and what is wrong with Atlanta United beyond Joseph Martinez being injured. Although, quite frankly, I would say MLS is the sort of league where we just talked about how balanced the championship is. MLS not quite as balanced as the championship, but very much more competitive than like the Premier League or La Liga, et cetera, from top to bottom. You take a guy of Martinez's caliber out of Atlanta, and a year after selling Miguel Almiron to Newcastle, they're wholly reliant on that sort of player. They let Darlington Nagbe go, which I think was a mistake. He's obviously playing well for Caleb Porter in Columbus. So the Champion Twellman discussions have revolved a lot around Atlanta United, a lot around player discipline, a lot around how managers push certain buttons in a 3-team tournament. And it's been interesting to listen to. Yeah. It's also been at times maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe too. Well,
I think it's been overplayed a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that might be it. That might be what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Because I mean, all right. So I haven't watched every Atlanta game in this tournament. I did watch the Atlanta Cincinnati game last Thursday, and I did watch the Atlanta Columbus game. And yes, Atlanta is not anywhere close to what they were before. Yes, their performances are poor. Yes, their attacking front is basically non-existent. But I just thought from that Atlanta-Columbus game, even though Columbus won this 1-0, towards the last 10 minutes of this game, Atlanta had a bunch of chances. They had a bunch of saves that were cleared off the line by the Columbus goalkeeper, and it could have easily been 1-1. There was one free kick that was taken that, I mean, it had to be a really good save to keep that one out. And this game could have ended up 1-1. Even though kind of on the whole 90 minutes, it probably felt like a 3-0 win for Columbus. The scoreline was just 1-0. I just thought that Taylor Twellman was just overplaying it a little bit, and also even just the next day on ESPN, on social media, just like on and on and on about how poor this Atlanta team is and how dire, and then also kind of the Frank de Boer.
Oh yeah, sorry, and I was like, even last night during the halftime of the New York Cincinnati game, the entire discussion seemed to be about Atlanta United.
Yeah, and post match too, like kind of in between the you mean the first game and the second game, again going in and going on and on about how poor this Atlanta team is. I just thought that yes, they disappointed. Yes, they are. There's a whole bunch of fixes that need to happen. I think a lot of it is the actual players on the team in terms of losing a lot of depth, losing a lot of talent, and this is a completely different team than what we're used to. I just thought he just went on and on a little bit too much about it. Even during the game itself, I mean, the game itself, Atlanta against Columbus, my criticism about this one is that the energy level in this game was flat. The first half was good, the second half was extremely flat. And I think, to me, I think I see a co-commentator and actually a commentator too, John Champion. Part of the responsibility is to increase that energy level just a little bit, even if the game is very flat and boring and uneventful, just to keep us informed. I mean, pull that viewer in, talk about maybe some of the tactics and what's happening on the pitch, what's not happening. But the tone from both John Champion and Taylor Twellman, you could tell that they were very disappointed with Atlanta, very frustrated. A lot of silences, a lot of just flat, kind of monotone. Was not exciting to listen to the commentary. And that I was surprised by, because I've criticized Stu Holden in the past before, where for a US men's national team game where they were playing poorly and losing, maybe in a Gold Cup. And I felt that he was being overly quiet and his tone was pretty flatline, because almost in some ways he's wearing his heart on his sleeve, and that comes out in the commentary where he's disappointed, he's frustrated, and the viewer, the listener, hears that too. the same thing too with this Atlanta game too. Is just that it almost felt like John Champion and Taylor Twellman were disappointed with Atlanta's performance. But for the neutral, for me, I wanted. Give me something more than that. Give me some energy. Give me some. I ended up watching the rest of the game, but I just thought that was disappointing. But anyway, that was just my take on the game itself.
Yeah, and actually, let me correct myself. I said that both New York teams are out. I'm wrong. As of this recording, New York City FC still has a slim hope of advancing. They're going to need a lot of things to go their way, especially in the Galaxy Houston game. They're going to probably need a draw in that match, and some things in the Chicago-Vancouver game that's going on as we record this. But they are not eliminated. The Red Bulls are. But they're looking at a possibility of a tournament or knockout stage without Atlanta and without either New York team. A distinct possibility of that, which is not, I think, what they wanted from a television standpoint.
Yeah, from actually, even the big markets, though, with New York, and New York seems to always fail anyway in terms of viewing numbers. So, but for me, for the most part, I've enjoyed watching the tournament thus far. It's been very scattered in terms of the quality level. Sometimes it's good. I mean, I was impressed by Cincinnati last night against New York Red Bulls, and been impressed by San Jose, been impressed by Brendan Aronson for Philadelphia. A lot of youth coming through the systems, and that I've been impressed with. But it's been inconsistent. There's been a lot of teams that have been extremely poor. Miami's been awful, absolutely dreadful to watch. Just a team lacking really creativity and imagination up front. Really frustrating. I mean, that's just one of a few teams that have been poor. It's been scattered. So I've enjoyed parts of it. I've enjoyed passages of games, but some of it is just really just low energy. I mean, I guess across the entire tournament, to me at least, the games I've watched, most of them, the energy levels haven't been as good as I would expect.
I'm curious out of this if we're going to see some new fans for San Jose, because you mentioned the Quakes and the way Matias Almeida has them set up to play. They're playing the sort of football the teams we water at the mouth over in Europe, like Bielsa's Leeds and Atalanta, etc. San Jose. And I think a lot of MLS fans are going to be angry I say this, right? Because they never talk about San Jose. San Jose right now, to me, based on the group stage games I've watched and some of last season, are the closest thing you have to that in MLS. They are playing that type of football. Mm-hmm. I don't know why ESPN and Fox haven't picked up on that in terms of showcasing them more. They don't have the individual stars, although they do have Chris Wondolowski in his last season. But they are playing the sort of football that I think would appeal to kind of core soccer fans, core football fans. I'm not sure that many other teams in MLS are playing that way. So thank you for mentioning San Jose. I actually had that mentally that I wanted to mention that and had forgotten to.
All right, so we'll move on, Kartik, because we've got a bunch of listener feedback this week, and also we've got some ratings to talk about too. But before we get to that, let's talk about TV streaming news, and I'll have you lead it off.
Yeah, Dave Roberts, who follows us on Twitter and is a great Twitter follower and very engaged with us, informs us that a new study released this week shows that approximately 32% of U.S. TV households don't have traditional pay TV subscriptions. Another 25% of households identified as, quote, cord shavers, or those that have cut back their pay TV service. The study asked those who called themselves cord shavers how likely they were to cut the cord fully within the next 6 months, and 45% said they were likely to do so. Chris, I fit into that 45%. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've just shelled out more money now for Peacock Premium and for CBS All Access, so I'm very much on the fence, and I've cut back on my DirecTV package to a more basic package. So I guess this is a critical year for the cable and satellite industry when you think about it this way and when you see these numbers.
Yeah, and Peacock's a perfect example of that too, where NBC and Comcast and Xfinity are looking at the future, or looking at the present really, and saying, okay, well, if we're losing a lot of these subscribers from cable, how can we keep them as paying customers on the cord cutting side or the cord shaving side? And Peacock is a good example of that too, where you have a library of content, some original content. But then one of the draws, at least for us and the viewers and listeners, is the Premier League and putting more and more games on there. The final day of the season of the Premier League this Sunday, and it's going to be, I think, 5 of those games are going to be on Peacock.
And I was shocked to see that because we have had all 10 matches spread across the Sci-Fis and the Bravos before MSNBC. I know with MSNBC last year there was breaking news and it interrupted a Spurs match, which was a critical match actually for Spurs to finish in the top 4. But so I wasn't surprised that was removed from the rotation. But all of the non-sports channels, I think, are off. CNBC is not a sports channel, obviously, but they've shown a lot of Premier League in the past. So you're down to USA, NBC, NBCSN, Golf, and CNBC. Only 5 matches on television from 10 the previous 6 seasons that NBC had the rights. So if that's not a wake-up call to people that things are moving pretty rapidly, as you have written about repeatedly, Chris, at World Soccer Talk, towards streaming of the Premier League, I think the Championship Sunday fixture list and where they're being shown, I think that jolted people when it was announced on Wednesday, quite honestly. And I wasn't surprised based on what we've been talking about, but I will admit I was a little disappointed by it, but I wasn't surprised at all.
Yeah, and of the 5 matches that are going to be televised on Sunday for Championship Sunday, starting at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, those 5 all have implications or ramifications on either the Europe qualifying for the Champions League or Europa League, or trying to avoid relegation. The 5 that do not have anything to do, basically are dead rubbers. Those are on Peacock and also NBC Sports Gold, and that will be the final day of NBC Sports Gold for the Premier League next season. Everything is going to be 175 games are going to be exclusive to Peacock. So moving on, we've heard back from a representative. We've reached out to them at the Scottish Professional Football League about the future of Scottish Premiership rights on US TV and or streaming. And then according to the representative, he told us that rest assured we are working hard at it and have a few conversations ongoing ahead of the season starting on August the 1st. So August the 1st is right around the corner, just over a week away. And the Scottish SPFL are trying to find a broadcaster here because BR Live, their current contract with the Scottish Professional Football League ended at the close of the 2019-2020 season. They are not renewing. So where does that go to? I mean, does that go to an ESPN Plus? Does that go to a DAZN? Or as soon as we know, we'll go ahead and publish that at worldsoccertalk.com. But that's the latest on the Celtics and the Rangers and the Aberdeens of the world. So keep an eye out for that one. And then Kartik, anything else going on as far as any more news you want to talk about?
Yeah, so just real quickly, I've been raising this the last several weeks, especially since the Premier League restart. It kind of toned down this week, but NBC seems to be committed to filling a lot of their programming time in their pregame and post-match shows with Jose Mourinho press conferences. I mean, even to the point where Rebecca Lowe will be halftime of another match and Spurs would have played earlier, and she'll say, we'll have Jose Mourinho's press conference and his comments. You're not going to want to miss this after the break, type of thing. And NBC has gotten to me with Mourinho since he went to Spurs. I mean, obviously, there's always been this Mourinho fascination in the media, but they've gotten very Sky-like in how they cover Mourinho and how they overplay everything he talks about, everything he does, magnify everything he says, and have these really kind of strange studio discussions, which I think based on Robbie Musto's tenor about it, he's not really interested in having the same conversation over and over again. I just contrast that with the way ESPN FC handles Mourinho, and Burley and Shaka in particular, Craig Burley and Shaka Hislop are just biting in their viewpoint about him. So I just wonder if NBC's coverage of Mourinho, which is very sensational, where they're hanging on every word he says, and he's provocative for a reason, is been directly influenced by Comcast's takeover of Sky. And this is sort of part of the Skyification of NBC's Premier League coverage that we've seen little bits and pieces of in the 2 years or year and a half since the takeover.
Yeah, the sad thing about this, Kartik, is that Jose still has appeal in terms of what he says. So a lot of people who dislike Jose, I mean, I think you and I are probably not in this equation, but a lot of people who dislike Jose will come back to that, will wait after that commercial break to find out what crazy thing he's just said again, which he seems to be many times out of touch and out of reality. But he's doing it on purpose. I mean, the things he's saying are manipulative. I mean, he's saying the things he's saying because there's a reason for that. Or the other side of things too, that people just there's a lot of viewers and listeners, I'm sure, that have a lot of respect for him and hang on to everything that he says, and will listen and watch that sometimes for the pure enjoyment of it, or sometimes for, okay, that's an interesting take. What will he say next? And it's still throughout the Premier League. I mean, probably Jurgen Klopp's the only other person that he has that such an appeal to the viewer.
Yeah, but the problem I have with the Mourinho thing is Klopp says some controversial things from time to time, and we know Sir Alex Ferguson was a master of that. But there is the thing with Mourinho that bothers me now is that I don't want to get too deep into fan bases, but I think Manchester United fans are sophisticated football fans, and most of them didn't buy into any of his rants. But I see the anger towards Michael Oliver in particular, who I think is, at times not the best center referee in the Premier League. We've seen him get demoted to the Championship at times a season or two ago. But the anger towards this one individual that I see on social media, because it's been incited by Mourinho's comments, reminds me of the sort of things we see in politics in the United States and in the United Kingdom when political figures attack people personally. And to me, that's where NBC and Sky may have a responsibility to draw a line, because Michael Oliver is still a referee trying to do his job, whether he's in the VAR booth, whether he's the fourth official, whether he's the center referee. He gets assigned to a lot of Spurs matches for some reason. Maybe that's just what happens, right, when you're a Premier League official. I mean, you can't. We have the famous case of Mark Clattenburg not being assigned to Everton matches at Goodison for many years because of that controversy. But you generally can't avoid a team, right? Mm-hmm. So it concerns me, because I think the people who are fans of Mourinho. And we saw this at Chelsea. We saw it less so at Manchester United, and I think there's just a difference in those two fan bases. Not insulting Chelsea's fan base. I just think there's just a difference in how those two fan bases interacted with Mourinho. That he is inciting anger and nastiness towards individuals, whether it's Mike Riley, whether it's Michael Oliver, whether it's someone having to do with the league directly or the FA directly, and I just don't think that's good for football. So if you're a broadcaster, at what point do you have an obligation to not air that? Because social media is poisonous enough, and my overall concern about Mourinho is he is inciting anger towards particularly referees, right? That's generally who it's directed towards. And now specific referees. It's not just referees as an entire community of officials. It's specifically one referee in Michael Oliver recently.
Yeah, definitely, and those are good points too, Kartik, and that is happening for sure, and it's putting pressure on these referees when that's got to be the hardest job in the business, to be, you mean with kind of scrutinized so much and to try to make all those right decisions. And last but not least, in the news segment, Liga MX returns. The Mexican Football League returns this weekend. Friday, the first match is Necaxa against Tigres. Big game there, 8:30 p.m. Eastern on TUDN and Fubo TV. And also this weekend, too, you've got Chivas, who have now got the rights in the United States, which are going to be on Telemundo. So in the past, Chivas games oftentimes were on Chivas TV, which is an OTT paid subscription channel, also sometimes available through YouTube, but sometimes you had to pay for it. But this now adds a huge player in the TV ratings market, because you've got not only do you have Club America and Cruz Azul and some of these other teams being featured on U.S. television, but now you have Chivas on Telemundo, which should generate some big numbers. They've got the game against Leon on Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern prime time. So that's huge for the Mexican League.
Yeah, Chris, I had a lot of conversations about this since it happened last week, and there's a general sense that this is that there's been some cost cutting at Univision and 2DNA, and that they were not able to pursue this. And now that Chivas is back on linear television and is going to be on Telemundo, that this represents a pretty strong threat on every other weekend or every other match to their to their ratings dominance on Saturday and Friday nights, right, or whichever night Chivas ends up playing. Mm-hmm. So. This we're going to keep an eye on this. Obviously, we tracked the ratings every week, but let's see if the ratings for Liga MX matches that do not involve Chivas, that are on 2DNA, come down when Chivas is playing. Not just track the Chivas ratings on Telemundo, but the concern I've heard from multiple people is that Univision is concerned that this will just diminish interest in some of the other teams. Now, they still have America, who are arguably bigger than Chivas in this country. They're 1 and 2. They still have Cruz Azul. They still have a great package. But this is a potential threat, and it's gone to their main rival. So watch this space, and also more soccer for NBC Universal. So that's a big a step forward for them.
Yeah, and who knows with NBC Universal too, because sometimes when they've had games in Spanish language, sometimes they've found a way to figure out a way to actually broadcast those games on English language, either streaming or on television sometimes. So there's a possibility, you never know, that you could have, if it's a big Chivas Club America game and it's Telemundo has the rights to the home Chivas games, that if it's a late broadcast on a, I don't know, Sunday night or something like that, when there's not much on NBCSN or whatever night of the week it is on, that they could actually broadcast that in Spanish.
There's a lot of incentive, I think, speaking of the MLS back tournament, for folks to watch Chivas, because you could argue, in spite of Vela is obviously sitting out this tournament. Chicharito was playing poorly, got injured, is out. Alan Pulido, you could argue, is the best Mexican player right now in Major League Soccer, playing for Kansas City, and he obviously was a star for Chivas before he came to Kansas City. So there's also something I've noticed the last few years is more and more MLS fans are watching Liga MX as there's more interaction between the two leagues. So this is again another potential viewing base for NBC Universal, whatever tack they take with this, if it's beyond Telemundo or even just for Telemundo, because we've seen, I think, a little more crossover audience the last few years. The ratings, not maybe not as many people as we had thought, but still more and more English language dominant fans, MLS fans watching Liga MX.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. I don't think it's only just MLS fans, but I'd say fans of other teams and other leagues too. Yeah. So even fans of Premier League clubs, and it's a Saturday night or a Sunday night or a Friday night, and there's not much else on, and they might be watching more of the Mexican league than before. So moving on to TV ratings, which is a good segue, Kartik, is that as the numbers keep on coming in, and again, we keep on reporting these at worldsoccertalk.com. We have a weekly column that's the most watched games. Usually the top 20 or top 30 games, and it's ranked in order of the highest viewing number to the lowest. It's interesting, Kartik, because with the MLS's back, it's given us a good sample of data that we haven't been able to look at before. And then, for example, it's the first time ever we've had so many of the teams featured on national television. So it provides everyone the metrics to show how popular or not some of these teams are that hardly ever appear on nationwide TV broadcasts. And we were mentioning San Jose before, and we had JP Manning several weeks ago, one of our listeners and followers, saying like we're not giving San Jose as much credit or focus, and my reply was, well, they're hardly ever on national television. I think other than the Cali Clasico against the local rivals, and other than that, that's about the only national television appearance that they get. Well, from the since July 8th, last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had every single team from Major League Soccer broadcast on national television, whether it's ESPN Deportes, or FS1 or Fox. The second thing, though, too, that this sample is giving us is it's the first time ever that there have been MLS games on without competition from other sports, other American sports. And that changes today, Thursday, as we're recording this, with the return of Major League Baseball. and we'll see if baseball cannibalizes some of the MLS numbers moving forward as it's getting ready to move into the round of the knockout stages of the MLS is back. But given, Kartik, those two major metrics, I mean, what's your take on some of the numbers that we've seen from the past week or two that we have in front of us here?
Look, I'm disappointed. I was really hopeful that this would be a breakthrough for the league in this country, and the ratings have not been terrible. I'm not pretending that, but they've been not what I had hoped. And you mentioned the key thing, baseball. I will continue to feel that the American media, both on news channels and on sports channels, the talk shows on Fox and ESPN. ESPN should be so invested in this tournament, right? But they can't get their talk shows to talk about MLS and or soccer in general, right? To talk about the Premier League or Serie A. They're showing Serie A matches every day, it seems, and they can't get these shows to talk about that. And then on the news channels, it's just baseball's the great American sport, even though interest in soccer is greater among younger people, among key demographics, than in baseball. And there's this bias in newsrooms, which is fueling this feeling that somehow sports is coming back in this country today, even though NWSL's been playing for a month and MLS has been playing for 15 days now. I'm disgusted by it. I know I expressed this in the last podcast. I've gotten angrier as the week has gone on about it. We can bash MLS and say the ratings aren't as good as they should be, or we wanted them to be. I will say that they're not as good as I wanted them to be. But I'm realizing a lot of this is out of their control now. That we just live in an American society that has some underlying hostility to this sport, even if they don't demonstrate it overtly. And I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, it's got to happen at some time. I mean, people who are editors in newsrooms must go to shopping malls, or obviously no one's gone anywhere in the last 5 months, but prior to that, go to places where they see people wearing Liverpool kits, or they see people wearing Club America kits or Boca Juniors kits. They have to understand the gravity of this sport, but they don't ever want to embrace it. They don't ever want to seem to put it on the same level as they put sports, which quite frankly, people in the key demographics in this country are less interested in, including baseball. So that's my rant on this. I'm disappointed, but it's out of MLS's control, I guess, at this point. Yeah,
we talked a little bit about this last week, and I gave it a lot of thought over the last 7 days or so after talking about it in depth in last week's podcast. Part of me, Kartik, wonders, because we basically last week made a blanket statement saying that we were just really disillusioned by the lack of popularity of soccer on US television. We were like, there's nothing else going on. This is the only major sport that's on television, and it's accessible. There's no. You can't say like, oh, I don't have. I don't know, beIN Sports or FS2. These were on FS1, ESPN. Also, of course, NBCSN, as well as, Tudo or whatever channels. These are very accessible cable channels that, even for cord cutters too, are very accessible. This is not the beIN Sports of the world here. But then the more I thought about it, Kartik, is, are these numbers more of a representation of Major League Soccer rather than soccer as a whole? And we saw the numbers for the Bundesliga. And I think the first week or two, they were averaging about 400,000 viewers for those games, which was decent, which is, for the Bundesliga, is fantastic. But I was expecting those to be much greater than that.
Yeah.
But we look at the numbers from this past week. We looked at, last Sunday's
I was
game.
Expecting, quite honestly, Chris, sorry to cut you off, but I was expecting the Premier League numbers to continue to be as high as they were the first week or two back on SN, and they haven't been. They've kind of flatlined. They're not bad, don't get me wrong, but it hasn't gotten the bump that I had expected, being basically uncontested on television.
Yeah, and just to throw out a couple of numbers here, just to give some perspective. So NBCSN last Sunday was Spurs against Leicester, and that was 557,000 viewers for that one. And then you had the Thursday game, which was the Man United against Crystal Palace last Thursday, 304,000 viewers for that one. Again, that's a 3:15 kickoff, so it's mid-afternoon Eastern time during office hours, if we can say office hours anymore. Who knows with the crazy world we live in. But those numbers are they're decent, but they're not like through the roof. I guess in a way, though, too, Kartik, we'll have to wait and see what this Chelsea-Liverpool number was like. You have the Pulisic factor where he's playing out of his skin right now, and then the Liverpool fandom in terms of seeing them raise the trophy on the cup. And that's a mid-afternoon Eastern time game on a weekday. What would that number be? Would that number, again, it's on NBCSN, but would that number be 750,000 people? If so, that's an incredible number. But for the most part, I mean, that's what made me think was like, okay, well, Liga MX, we know that those numbers are strong, and I think for one of the Copa por Mexico tournament that they had, their friendly tournament, kind of their version of MLS is back, which was a lot smaller. But there was one of the games, I forgot which one, that had, I think, more than a million viewers for that. So those are good numbers. But one of the things that came up through the comments and the feedback on our podcast from last week, Kartik, is that, and I can't remember who it was, and I couldn't find the comment, but it was from somebody saying that their perspective on these numbers, without any major sports going on, other sports going on, is that they believe that a lot of these numbers are driven by expats. So, for example, which I thought was an interesting take, because, a lot of the Liga MX, the Mexican numbers are driven by either Mexicans or Mexican Americans.
Yeah.
And I can see that as a major factor. And they were saying, too, a lot of the Premier League numbers were driven really by either expats or Anglophiles. People that are into Downton Abbey or into watching a lot of British.
Oh, there's definitely, yeah.
So there's 100%. There's that factor too. I mean, it's probably hard to find a fan of watching the Premier League who's not an Anglophile. If somebody hates England, they're probably not into the Premier League. I would imagine. But even like Serie A, you kind of think, okay, well, the large Italian-American communities in New York and the Portuguese numbers that we get for the Premier League, you look at those and say, okay, there's a lot of expat communities. Even I think the Barcelona and Real Madrid is different, but still it's more of the Spanish-speaking audience, kind of an expat in a way. And that made me wonder, too, whether or not that was a factor in some of these numbers and why we're kind of seem to be always plateauing. We can't get that huge leap to the next level. And like I said last week, too, until the US wins a World Cup, soccer seems to be, from a viewership perspective, a once in every 4 years viewing experience.
Yeah, and that's what's so frustrating is that you don't have any of the kind of crossover from people who watched the Women's World Cup, for example, to watch NWSL, or the Men's World Cup to watch the Premier League or the MLS. The ratings for those leagues didn't go up after 2018, after the 2018 World Cup or the 2019 Women's World Cup. And yeah, I guess maybe the Premier League's numbers now are also impacted by the fact that a lot of expats are trapped in Britain. They went back and because of travel restrictions haven't come back. But yeah, I'm looking for an explanation because I had thought, especially after the first week of the Bundesliga's return and their numbers, and then the first week of the Premier League, the numbers were eye-catching, and they've just flatlined or actually gone down since then. So that's it may also have to do with a lot of matches that have been meaningless. It's been a summer. I know they're calling it the summer of soccer, my Premier League summer, but it's been a summer of dead rubbers, really. Which is why, I geeked out on the Watford-West Ham match because I thought, oh my gosh, this is a meaningful match for both teams. We haven't had many of those. You'll say the same thing, obviously, about Leicester and Man United this Sunday. But that may be a factor, but I don't know. It's probably deeper, like what we're talking about. It probably is not has nothing to do with the table or individual importance of matches. And again, MLS is back. Every match, at least in theory, has had something on the line, and the numbers have been okay, but they haven't been what I thought they could be.
Yeah, and actually I would argue, Kartik, that yes, there have been some dead rubbers, but looking at match week 37 for the Premier League, all 10 of those matches had implications on either top four or qualification for Europe or relegation, so every single match mattered there, but there have been some dead rubbers. But what I would say, though, Kartik, is that and this whole coronavirus has been absolutely dreadful. But it's been a perfect storm for, we didn't plan it this way, but a perfect storm for having an opportunity for soccer to be televised on national television with no competition, with some great teams involved from various leagues and around the world on television, and an opportunity for us to see, okay, how popular is soccer despite all the craziness going on, despite people cutting the cord and being probably doing different things than they would have done on a normal basis. But if we ever wanted evidence that soccer is really not taking off, this was it. And again, too, I think part of that is Major League Soccer. But it's not all Major League Soccer, because even some of the other numbers have been, they've been okay. And like you said too, Kartik, that the MLS numbers are not bad. It's just that having these games, the 9 o'clock games on a Eastern 9 a.m. Eastern on ESPN with MLS is back. That was a test. Those numbers were, on the 150,000 or less. Roughly, the 8 o'clock Eastern games have been in the 200s, and then the 10:30 Eastern games, depending on what channel it's on, if it's FS1 or an ESPN or an ESPN2, and depending on who's playing, those numbers have been anywhere from the hundreds to the 200s. So nothing. It's just a normal season. This is the normal numbers we get to experience.
300,000 this week actually among MLS games, which was at least on English language television, which was stunning. But and there've been some low rating matches. There have been some matches that have been under 100, which we see from time to time, which has been stunning. One other observation on the TV ratings this week, and I know you and I discussed this offline, ESPN's numbers for some random Serie A matches that they're showing mid-afternoon being in the 100,000s, like 171,000 for Cagliari and Sassuolo. This tells me what a bad job Fox and FS1 have done promoting the Bundesliga, because these matches, there's a Sampdoria match I know that got a decent number also in there, and there was obviously Atalanta Hellas Verona, which was an exciting match. Everybody likes watching Atalanta. It's a match I watched also, close to 200,000 viewers. You could not find Bayern matches get these sorts of numbers on FS1 or even close to them. And that just tells me, one, the power of ESPN, but two, the power of promotion, because ESPN is pretty regularly, to their credit, I'm complaining about their hosts and their talk shows and SportsCenter, et cetera. But in terms of during at least the MLS matches, they're pretty heavily promoting Serie A, and that they have a Serie A match. Hey, especially during the 9 a.m. MLS kickoffs. Hey, we got a Serie A match at 1 o'clock. Join Mark Donaldson and Matteo Benetti, et cetera. And that is reflecting in some increased viewership, which tells me should Sampdoria be getting higher numbers in the U.S. than Bayern Munich? No, but they are. They are since the restart. So that again puts the ESPN versus Fox discussion into full view. It's not just about how Fox covers the matches. We've had plenty of critiques of that through the years. It's the promotion and how they don't promote certain properties, and they just kind of flip the switch on things. And by the way, people who watch other sports complain about this too to me. It's only the NFL I understand that Fox is really good at promoting and Fox is really good at covering. And as someone who watches golf, I've said this on a previous show several weeks ago, I was so relieved that the U.S. Open is returning to NBC, because it's the coverage, it's the promotion, it's all of it. So I think that's pretty telling. So Serie A doing better on ESPN than the Bundesliga did on Fox, which I don't know if that now with the Bundesliga moving to ESPN, if that takes some clips Serie A's wings a bit, or if this means Serie A may emerge as that third most watched league among European leagues in the U.S. Behind Premier League and La Liga. And of course, La Liga has a muddled television situation, so who knows? Maybe we're looking at second.
Yeah. Well, what I would say, just to close this segment out, Kartik, is that the biggest winner in this summer of soccer, which every summer is a summer of soccer, but in this summer of soccer, is ESPN Plus. I mean, Serie A getting a lot of featured limelight and getting some decent numbers compared to other leagues that, like you said, the Bundesliga, and then of course the Bundesliga moving to ESPN Plus. And now, I mean, Serie A is going to be starting up again before you know it with their next season, ESPN Plus, the Championship, ESPN Plus. MLS. I mean, practically everything is moving to, or it's already there, is ESPN Plus, but this has been a great opportunity for ESPN Plus or ESPN to feature a lot of their programming and to convince people to subscribe to ESPN Plus before they raise the prices. All right, let's move to listener mailbag. We got a lot of great feedback this week, and we really appreciate everyone's input. First up is Robert. In the last couple of days, there have been a couple of games that have caused me to want to add to your discussion. Some of the criticism of MLS misses the point. To me, a football league has to be competitive, entertaining, and have a decent quality of play. Some of the MLS games have had all three, some did not. The recent EPL games have been the same, some very good games and some truly terrible games. The difference is the bad games in the EPL had rosters full of millionaires. I partly agree with Kartik about the MLS season being full of somewhat meaningless games. The same can be said for the Premier League. Fairly early in the season, it became apparent who the top 4 to 5 and the bottom 4 to 5 will be. The middle 10 are basically all just filler. This year was more competitive because several of the normal top 5 or 6 were terrible, considering their payroll. The hard-working teams like Wolverhampton, Burnley and Leicester could not challenge the top 2, but often were very entertaining. So for me, with the MLS, you get what you pay for. It has become a very competitive league that is not dominated by a couple of teams, and the playoff system sometimes allows late gelling teams to come up winners. Now, Kartik, I'll just chime in with a couple of my takes on this one too, is that while I agree with Robert on some points, to me, I don't know. To me, yes. I mean, as far as the very, very top. So usually the top 2. So whether it's Liverpool or Manchester City, or I mean, next season we hope that. I mean, Chelsea looks a lot stronger. Man United looks a lot stronger. That's probably about it. Those top 4 are going to go strong next season. There's always that hope that maybe between those 4 it'll be a lot more competitive. But take those top 2 out of the equation. The rest of it's still been entertaining. I mean, to me, that we're coming down to the wire, to the last game of the season to determine who's going to make that those Champions League spots, as well as the Europa League spots, as well as the relegation. I mean, only right now we only know that one of those teams is going down. And then I looked, Kartik, at last year's MLS season, the decision day, the final game of the season. And out of the final game of the season, with 12 games being played, any guess of how many of those games were meaningful? That determined. Well, there's no relegation. There's no champion. So, how many of those final day season games determined who would make the playoffs?
Probably who would make the playoffs, maybe one. I think seeding was on the line in a lot of matches, but in terms of who made the playoffs, maybe 1 or 2.
Yeah, it was 2. So seeding, as far as having the home field advantage, that's not factored in my 2, but really, to me, 2 of those final 12 games on the final day of the season had, to me, the home field factor is important for those clubs, but for me, the neutral watching the games, I don't really care.
Actually, it may not be. I think what we're finding in MLS is that it doesn't seem to make a difference.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I know they tweaked the playoff format to try and make it mean more, and credit to the league for doing that. Year 1, the takeaway was that it meant just as little as it did before with the 2 legs.
I guess at the end of the day, for me personally, it's just, all soccer is good. So whatever leagues or clubs fans enjoy the most, I encourage them to watch more of that. I try to dabble as much as I can and watch as much leagues and games and clubs as I can. But there's differences, and sometimes, a lot of our listeners have different things that they're looking for, that they enjoy better. So whether it's the technical side of things in terms of soccer, whether it's the coaching side and kind of more the manager influence, or if it's just the style of play, but some good feedback there from Robert. Rico Richardson says the problem is real simple. Soccer leagues need to market, actually invest better in advertisements to the American audience. They don't do that. MLS doesn't do that. And I would argue, Kartik, that MLS probably makes more of an attempt to market Major League Soccer than most leagues do. I mean, you look at Fox, FS1, FS2, ESPN, Tudo, and you count the number of times that those channels are co-promoting or cross-promoting and talking about, hey, coming up this weekend, or even if it's a game, with Fox is a good example, even if it's a Bundesliga game that has absolutely no relevance to Major League Soccer, it's a lot of MLS promos. Coming up Sunday night, we've got Colorado against Sporting Kansas City, those types of things. I would argue that MLS probably does more promotion rather than less. Next up is Joey Fleming. Listening to your chat on Serie A, and I thought I'd chime in. I personally won't watch another game in that league until they make a genuine attempt to sort out their overt racism issues. Kartik, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I get a lot of people saying that. So that's not unusual, and I think that's something they have working against them. So that probably creates a ceiling in the U.S. and maybe also even in the U.K. In terms of the U.K., I think it's just limited for any non-British league. That probably is going to hurt it in the U.S. And you contrast that with the with the Bundesliga, which has been all in on Black Lives Matter. That might be when I just said that there's a competition between those two leagues and they're both going to be on ESPN platforms starting next season. Maybe that gives the advantage to the Bundesliga, quite frankly. I mean, I think more cosmopolitan type football fans, there are a lot. It's not just Joey. It's I've gotten it from about a dozen people when I promote Serie A. Well, I can't watch that league because of the racism. So it's not just an isolated thing.
Next up is Jessica Shea, and Jessica says, listen to the podcast on Spotify today. Very good. Have you all considered the reason for lower TV numbers is perhaps due to people cutting the cord and also getting with fewer streaming services to save? And Jessica, the feedback on this one would be that oftentimes that even the TV numbers do factor in the streaming numbers too. So, for example, if I subscribe to Fubo TV and I'm watching FS1 and watching one of the MLS's back games, even though I'm not subscribed to a cable service or a satellite service to watch that FS1, if you look in for example, in Fubo TV in the settings, it's already, the default is that, and there's actually a message there that says that you will be, your viewing habits are being monitored basically, and that that will be part of the Nielsen numbers that they report on sharing, how many people are watching games, etc. Now you can actually switch that off if you want to. That's just one example, but Sling TV, Fubo TV, YouTube TV, etc. A lot of those numbers are aggregated with the TV viewing numbers. So even though the TV viewing numbers, we see some dips sometimes, I don't believe from the streaming side, unless somebody cut the cord on the streaming side is watching these games illegally, which we know happens, those numbers are not counted. So, but that's definitely a point of that is definitely hurting TV numbers. Kelly Outlaw says, I'm a huge American sports fan, NFL, American football, basketball, but the past 5 years, soccer has been my favorite, especially MLS. The media bias is sickening and disrespectful to fans of the sport. Most Americans think soccer is a soft sport with very little action, when in actuality, MLS games are way more exciting than most NBA games. The NFL benefited hugely from fantasy football. Baseball is unbearable. The NFL TV numbers are undeniably good, but NBA TV numbers are down the past few years. NBA numbers are down even with the majority of the stories on the sports talking head shows being mostly NFL and NBA driven. Give Major League Soccer a few segments on those shows and the numbers will grow. Yeah, I completely agree there, Kartik. I think, but it is frustrating though too when you kind of watch You mean, well, I've been watching I'll watch an ESPN broadcast of an MLS is back game from 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern. And then right after that is, I don't know, First Take or something like that. And they have like 5 talking heads. And immediately they transition to, hey, there's a story about an NFL player that just tweeted something and here's what he's saying or whatever, which to me is not news. But it changes. Then it's
they don't even acknowledge the game that just took place.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy, and I've become more irritated. I mean, I've been aware of this my whole life, right? But I've become more irritated in the last 14 days, really since MLS kicked back off about it, because to me it's really blatant. I think some of these people are going out of their way to not mention soccer. Some of it is subconscious. A lot of it, I believe, is conscious. And this brings me back to the whole point is I've been on kind of the reform side of American soccer, wanting to have pro-rel, wanting to have solidarity payments, wanting to flip the calendar, etc. But one thing I would always tell other reformers, and they would tell me, oh no, if we do all this, soccer will be the biggest thing in this country, is that there is a built-in bias against the sport in this country, and you have to give some deference to MLS based on that. They would always deny that to me. But now, I mean, I don't think anyone can deny it after these last few weeks when NWSL and MLS are the only 2 things playing. And the NWSL, the lack of coverage of NWSL also has bothered me, because that is coming a year after the U.S. women's team did so much to capture the imagination and champion social justice causes in this country. And as the country is inflamed in like this social justice revolution, there's very little talk of the U.S. women and NWSL and the U.S. women's team. So I think there's just a outright bias out there.
Okay, listeners, so stick with us because we've got some additional great feedback from a lot of you, the listeners. So next up is JP. JP says, nice to see you guys finally come to the realization that soccer is still very much a niche sport here in the United States. I too expected ratings to improve with it being the only game in town. Unfortunately, lots of people have the soccer's boring mindset that our media and pop culture brain perpetuates and won't give it a chance. Premier League dominates here, I think, because of the common language and how easy it is to find on television, good marketing and consistent channels. EPL is what got me into club soccer from being just a World Cup, Euros and Champions League final fan, but immediately got hooked on La Liga along with Serie A in HD and English commentary instead of the grainy RAI. When beIN Sports took over. Haven't looked back since. The Premier League has become unwatchable to me over time in comparison. I haven't watched much MLS, but didn't even realize the camera angles were new. As Chris or Kartik said, looks like what La Liga and Serie A often provide with much of the field in view and can see the runs players are making and the attack develop. That's another reason I don't like the Premier League, the constant, tight, one-player focus when dribbling and the field almost cut in quarters in the attack zone. Can't see what's happening on top or bottom half of the field or who the pass is intended for or how a player got open. So some great feedback there from the viewing perspective there from JP. Barry says, on the podcast, you were referring or wondering why the Premier League gets so much more viewership in the US than any other European leagues, which you believe has higher quality soccer. I think the reasons are pretty obvious. Number one, style of play. This is not a phenomenon restricted to the US. The Premier League generates far more international rights fees than any other European league. By viewership, it is the most popular league in the world. The English all-action, more physical, more direct style of play seems to play well across the globe. It also helps that the English is one of the most common languages worldwide. Number two, competition. Juve has won 8 Serie A titles in a row. So has Bayern in Germany. In the past 15 years, either Real Madrid or Barcelona have won every La Liga title except one. On the other hand, there have been 5 different champions in the last 8 years in the Premier League. Number 3, English language coverage, highlight shows, print articles, podcasts of the Premier League is far more extensive than for any of the other major European leagues. And fourth and finally, historically, there has been more availability of Premier League telecasts in the United States than other European leagues. Kartik, do disagree with any of those
No, I
points?
agree with all of that. I think that's all correct, and I think the style of play is really an important thing because I have often talked about American fans confusing entertainment with quality, and the Premier League is the most entertaining. I mean, I would argue the Championship is the most entertaining league. We already had that conversation earlier, but in terms of top flight leagues in the world, the Premier League is the most entertaining league. I don't deny that at all. I'd say Bundesliga is probably number 2, but there's a difference between end-to-end action, which involves a lot of bad giveaways and defensive errors, and like quality on the ball, touches, etc. But yeah, I think that those are all key factors. I also think there's the Anglophile factor you mentioned earlier, which people who watch Downton Abbey or watch Masterpiece Theater, they like the Premier League. I mean, it's a really interesting phenomena of kind of anglicized Anglo-American culture taking hold. By the way, the same thing is true on the other side of the Atlantic. These people who watch American sitcoms and dramas and like Hollywood movies often watch the NFL. Mm-hmm. I've found in Britain.
Yeah,
and there are people who've told me they watch the NFL and they don't like our football. They don't like soccer over there, which I think is very weird. But that's their I don't know what the term would be. Yankee files, I guess. American files.
Next up is R. Kujay, and he says, I have followed football since 1950s. When my now 40-something son started playing, there was zero coverage on television in the States, except for the World Cup. When we went to my son's matches, people did not know the laws of the game. I put that off to due to the lack of exposure here. Fast forward to the late 1990s, going to my grandson's games. Same thing. When my son was young, it was said that soccer is the next big thing in America. Soccer will always be the next big thing here. I've stopped having this discussion with others. It's my game, the beautiful game. And I completely agree with that. I think the awareness of soccer has increased. Again, I keep on going back to when if the US ever wins the World Cup, that would be the game changer. Because and if there's no game changer after that one, then we may as well just enjoy what we're enjoying and just have the realization that this game is never going to be bigger than what it is already, which is already bigger than what it was in the 1980s. So no complaints here. Anthony says, a few comments on the themes from the podcast. Number 1, when the Bundesliga restarted, I watched a few of the games, mainly to get a glimpse of Dortmund. I think Haaland, Erling Haaland, Jadon Sancho, etc., and to see how Leipzig and Bayern were looking. However, after a couple of weeks, it was clear that Bayern was going to win again, and it became less interesting. I've basically been watching the Premier League exclusively in recent weeks. For some reason, the way that NBC promotes the Premier League makes way more teams and matches compelling than the way the other leagues are covered. I can be happy watching a Sheffield United against Everton match. I know the history of the teams and understand the stakes, etc. I can't do the same for a Wolfsburg against Frankfurt game. Number 2, I have watched a few of the MLS matches, but I don't really find most of the teams compelling, especially without fans, which do add a lot of which do add a lot for MLS TV broadcasts. Number 3, I have been disappointed that more Americans aren't watching soccer. ESPN SportsCenter seems to be promoting some of their matches, but I'm not sure how many people watch SportsCenter these days. Without a World Cup to draw casual fans in, a lot of people can't seem to get over the hump to watch soccer until the US starts producing better players who then improve the US men's national team and go on to play at a high level in Europe. It is going to be extremely tough to get more traction for any kind of club soccer in the US. So if you want soccer to succeed in the US, you simply need the men's national team to do better. And that Kartik, I agree completely with. A lot of the fate of soccer, the popularity of soccer is based on the US men's national team. And my kind of estimation of where the US men's national team is right now, and not just the playing level, but the probably the lowest morale among fans probably since I can ever remember is at a real low. So the optimism there isn't a lot of optimism there for the future.
No, and this is a dilemma, right? And we talked about it when the U.S. missed the World Cup, and I've talked about it regularly, that I always felt like the national team was, for better or for worse, the gateway. and I wanted people to kind of embrace club football more in this country. And hey, you've got a local club, whether it's MLS or USL or back in those days NASL, etc., that you should be following. This goes back to conversations when you and I went to Germany in 2015. Even among people in the Bundesliga, and keep in mind, Germany had just won the World Cup a year earlier, 15 months earlier, were like, you guys are so focused on your national team. They knew American soccer culture, that like the national team was a bigger deal there than the club teams. And that's, I guess, part of the aspect of jingoism and nationalism in the U.S. I think it's unfortunate, but it's probably the reality, and I don't know that there's any. We've reached heights with our national team that I don't know that we'll, on the men's side, that we will ever reach again anytime soon. Obviously, hosting in 2026 is an opportunity, but I think back at our team in 2010, that team very easily could have made the semifinals of the World Cup. I think about kind of the teams we had. 2002 people talk about, but really even 6 and 10, we had really good teams that maybe didn't fulfill their potential in the World Cup, but outside World Cups were really good.
Hey, Kartik. So you used to have a pinned tweet that you had for the longest time up there. Do you remember what it said? Because it's not there anymore. About the club football.
It was about a national team cannot drive football culture. Go support your club team. That's what matters. And I still believe that, but this country is different, and that's the way it works in Britain. I mean, in fact, I'm reading a book right now talking about how in England the national team is not popular. People gravitate around the national team every time they're in a tournament and seem to be doing well, but that football culture is defined by your clubs. And Germany, we had that experience when we talked to people at the Bundesliga when we went over there, and same thing would be said in Italy, same thing would be said in Spain. The countries that, by the way, have been far more successful in international football than the U.S. But unfortunately here, that pinned tweet, it still hasn't played out 3 years later. People are always looking at American players and how they're going to fit into the national team. Right? Even these MLS games, we're not talking about how some of these guys will do for if they move on from MLS, or how they're going to help impact their teams in this tournament. We're saying, that guy would be a good number 6 for the U.S., right? Everything goes through that lens, which to the credit of the Premier League, maybe the Premier League is partly responsible for people in England not thinking right away. And now there are some writers like the Henry Winters, et cetera, that will still do it, but not saying, Ben Chilwell, he's got to be England's left back. They're thinking he's a really good young left back for Leicester, and they could finish in the top 4 this season. That's where we need to evolve to, in my opinion.
All right, listeners. So we've got 3 more fantastic listener mailbag replies here and comments here. So hang with us. I know we've got a lot to get through here, but next up is Rod. In the middle of a pandemic, with a good part of the country under mandatory stay-at-home orders, with nothing to do except watch television, and a very good part of the country desperately craving any live sports, noting the absurdly large audiences for cornhole, pro bowling, pro bull riding, and so on. The MLS game on Fox on July 11th, competing against only reruns and the UFC preliminaries, with its 587,000 audience, managed to be the lowest rated program of any of the type any of type since the pandemic began, including reruns of news magazines and true crime mysteries, ball games played decades ago, game shows and so forth on any of the big 4 networks, and was lower than much of what appeared on the CW. And that was a case by a significant margin. Were it not for stay-at-home orders, the soccer game might have been the lowest rated national television broadcast TV program ever. Sometimes there's a consternation in this space about why the ratings are so low, the speculation ranging from the quality of the broadcast to the quality of the announcing to the fact that a lot of MLS games are counter-programmed directly against NFL or college football games or the World Series, only to upend crushed. But it seems to me that the lesson here is that even without much in the way of sports alternatives, that the poor showing reveals that it is the game, not the competition or the internal mistakes, that is the problem. Whew. Wow. I don't think it's the game, though, Kartik. I mean, to me, I honestly think, I mean, and again, this would never happen, right? You would never have a Manchester United against Liverpool or an Arsenal against Chelsea or a Barcelona against Real Madrid being able to be shown in prime time, 8 p.m. Eastern on in a meaningful game, not an ICC game, on Fox.
Yeah.
So we'll never know. I mean, it's easy to say it is the game, but it's Major League Soccer.
There was a comment earlier about the pop culture bias against this sport in this country, and I think that that's a big part of it. So there's this view that Barcelona versus Real Madrid is something foreign, it's something not American, it's not exciting, it's not entertaining. It's much more entertaining to sit and watch a baseball game where a guy is whatever. I could get into really my dislike of baseball, but I think that there is this programming that comes from some
brainwashing.
Program. Yeah, brainwashing that's the word I'm looking for, coming from these shout shows that have an inherent bias against this sport. And right. I mean, they can't even when these MLS games end. We're recording this during one of the 9 a.m. matches, the Vancouver-Chicago match. When this match ends, they're going to go to some ESPN program where they're going to pretend like what happened right before their program didn't happen, and they're going to go right to the NFL. I guarantee you, or NBA or whatever.
I think a lot of it, though, Kartik. I think a lot of it too. Yeah, brainwash is probably a good word, but almost like programmed. But the other part of it, though, too, is just your local TV station. And I can't remember the last time I switched on a local TV station in the sports segment and had any mention of soccer. I mean, otherwise, if during the World Cup, yes. If that local TV broadcaster had the rights to that World Cup. But otherwise, I mean, again, it's every 4 years. It's 3 years and like 11 months of nothing.
The stations in the Miami Fort Lauderdale market showed highlights of the Euros during. But again, that was an international tournament. They do not do it for club soccer matches.
Right. Yeah. But, oh gosh. Next up is Derek. A quick question about ESPN Plus. I've been enjoying some of the obscure offerings that they have, like the Danish League and the Swedish League, but have been frustrated that they only tend to show a very small number of the games in these leagues. Do they only have the rights to broadcast certain teams and or matches, or is it them thinking that there would not be enough demand? Thanks for always keeping us entertained with your podcast. So the answer to that is they are broadcasting as many of the games that are available to them. So for the Danish Super League, oftentimes that might be like 1 or 2 games a match week. And the same thing too with the Swedish League is just it could be 1 or 2 games. Those are the only games that are available to them under their contract. So they don't have access to all of the games for all the teams. And I don't know the Danish League and Swedish League as much, but while those games may be televised for maybe the club TV channel, not all of them would be televised for television or even over there. So those leagues and then those broadcasters would focus on giving the best production for those games that are available worldwide. Last but not least, Nick Siliberto says, regarding Kartik's opinion on the CAS ruling, what kind of regulation, if any, would you like to see replace FFP? Kartik's criticisms of FFP are valid. However, situation where any billionaire, oligarch, energy drink company, or sovereign nation can create a super club on a whim is even worse. We need a regulation that allows sensible and reasonable investment while preventing top European competitions from becoming playgrounds for billionaires. Unfortunately, I don't see this happening under the current governing framework. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Nick. Thank you for that. I think luxury taxes, like we've seen it's funny, I've spent this whole podcast bashing baseball, but something they do, right? They don't have a hard salary cap, so the Yankees and the Red Sox can spend more money than the Orioles or the Rays if they want to, but there is a tax that comes back into that, and there's a sustainability for other teams that comes from that, revenue that comes from that. I think that's one potential solution. Another is to set kind of general guidelines in terms of of spending and per club or per kind of some sort of ratio per club. But then if they exceed that, fine them, but not the sort of FFP regime that I think makes it very, very difficult for any club that is not established and does not have established sponsors and established streams of revenue to compete. And the other thing I have not mentioned about FFP on this show, but I've mentioned on previous incarnations of this podcast and when I've made appearances elsewhere, is I think that there's a huge amount of discrimination in FFP toward clubs in wealthier areas. So, for example, Aston Villa or West Brom, we talked about the West Midlands earlier. West Brom, Aston Villa, Birmingham City, Wolves, they cannot charge for tickets what Arsenal or Spurs can't. They just can't, based on the economy of Birmingham and West Bromwich and Wolverhampton, based on the economic income, the per capita income, etc. So they are penalized for that essentially under FFP because Arsenal is always going to have more ticket revenue coming in, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to, if you're going to do another construct like FFP, you have to account for that. You have to account for those differences in regions. I think a luxury tax is probably a safer way to go if you have to put some sort of guideline in place. This all having been said, I don't like the fact that states can buy clubs. You know, Manchester City, PSG are essentially state-owned clubs. Sheffield United has state funding now from Saudi Arabia. I think if Newcastle gets bought by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, they would actually be the first directly kind of connected to a state. And there are other examples of this. It's not just those four clubs or potentially those four clubs. And oligarchs coming in and throwing tons of money in. We've seen that recently at Everton too. At the same time, I think that's fairer than just saying, okay, well, Manchester United has more revenue than everybody else, and they can take on as much debt as they want, right? That seems to not be a problem for UEFA. Mm-hmm. So they should always be allowed to spend this amount of money. But hey, Everton, you can't. So I mean, I think that there needs to be a system to rein in the situation. But in the absence of finding that perfect solution, I'd rather do nothing. Is what I think I'm saying than have something like FFP.
I'm on the same page as far as, I mean, to me, I prefer the hands off. I mean, as long as it's sustainable, as long as clubs do not go out of business and when it gets too out of control. But you look at Chelsea, you look at Leicester, you look at Manchester City. Without the Premier League becoming a playground for billionaires, these clubs would not have won all the titles that they've won in the last 5 years or so. I find it more interesting. I find it more exciting. Yes, it is kind of perverse at times in terms of the wealth and everything that's involved, but I find that more exciting.
Right? The people who are Premier League fans, and specifically, and you talk about the competition and 5 winners in 8 years, that is because of this investment and really because of ignoring FFP or pre-FFP situations. Before Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea, it was a 2-team league at the top for many years. Yep. Okay, and there were years I thought Leeds could break into that top 2. They never did. There were a couple of years where I thought Newcastle might be able to. They never did. It was Liverpool was in a down period, and it was Arsenal and Manchester United exchanging the trophy back and forth. So the Premier League wasn't much different than Spain. So if you advocate for FFP, a lot of people who advocate for FFP are Liverpool fans or Arsenal fans, by the way. But if you advocate for FFP, think about that. And then at the same time, you talk about how competitive the top of the Premier League is compared to other leagues. Realize that you're kind of contradicting your own argument.
So hats off to all the viewers and listeners and followers for some great questions, feedback, observations, and opinions week after week, and this episode in particular, some really, really good feedback there. But we want you to have your say, so let us know. You can always reach us via email through web at worldsoccertalk.com, as well as facebook.com/worldsoccertalk, and on Twitter at worldsoccertalk. Plus, of course, you can always post your comments on worldsoccertalk.com. We're back every Thursday. Most of the episodes, or actually all the episodes, are released on most of the major podcast players, as well as YouTube and worldsoccertalk.com. And there was one podcast player, Kartik, that you pointed out this past week that was that you're on now that you really enjoy. Which one is that one?
It is. It is. Oh my God, Overcast. Sorry, and I've been listening to our podcast on Overcast every week, and I like just the controls a little better than Apple Podcasts.
All right. Well, speaking of controls, this weekend there's uncontrollable soccer. So much to choose from. On Sunday, in particular, with the Championship Sunday, the start of the Championship semi-finals in the playoffs. You've got the NWSL Challenge Cup final. You've got the next the knockout stage of the MLS games on Sunday night. And that's just Sunday. Of course, you've got the Portuguese League wrapping up. You got the Serie A wrapping up too. And I'm probably forgetting a whole bunch of other leagues too, Kartik. But what should they do? What are you going to be doing this weekend? Give us some final thoughts.
Yeah, enjoy your football. Going to watch Championship Sunday. Leicester, Manchester United in particular. Obviously, Serie A and Liga MX restarting. And the NWSL Challenge Cup final. That's a big game. That's a big game for television ratings too on Sunday on CVS over the air. And hoping that records a better number than what we've been seeing in the other leagues. But now I'm more realistic about it, unfortunately. So enjoy your football.
And actually, Kartik, let me just add to that too. Hopefully, CBS includes some preview or some promo, perhaps, for the Champions League coverage that is coming up in the first week, and also Europa League coverage. That's one to keep an eye out for. And one last thing, Kartik, is the Coupe de France final is PSG against Saint Etienne on Friday. That's on beIN Sports and beIN Sports in Espanol. So we've got a huge weekend of soccer.